book, I would love also to help draw to your attention to the huge number of master's and PhD theses that are appearing every day in Saudi Arabia and other countries about biomedical ethical issues in Islam. Extensive work. I think we need to draw our attention to that work. The third comment to our teacher, Dr. Mashal. There is actually, it's okay, it's good to tell the whole world that we have equivalent principles to the international bioethical principle, but we should not be tempted to find, just to find anything to tell them that there is an equivalent. We have to be critical. We have, first of all, to look to those international principles in depth and in details and see if they have anything that can be, contradict Islamic Sharia before just, being hurried to find something to be equivalent to that. We need to be very critical when we explore all options in biomedical ethics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now the microphone is with Ayman Shaban. Why is Georgetown away from lenient on secular and away from Islamic bioethics?
Thank you very much for the question. I just want to clarify that there is a difference between the center and all the activities that is going on in main campus in Washington, D.C., that is the Georgetown University, and the activities that are going on here in Qatar, Georgetown, Qatar. So our project, Islamic Bioethics Project, focuses primarily on the Islamic perspective on bioethics. And I wanted to show actually in the last slide of my presentation the website that we have for that. So perhaps you were looking at the website of the center in main campus, but not the website on our site. So perhaps I can give you after the presentation the exact address, or Google if you just go Islamic Bioethics Project, and then there you will find actually multiple web pages related to that.
Professor Omar Hassan.
There's no comment.
So ونصيحة وديني نصيحة. بسم الله Prof. Ali.
Thank you very much for your advice and your comment. What I meant, and what many other people in the area of ethics have meant, is that this is a human heritage. And Islam taught us to benefit from, we benefit from the Greek and the Chinese and the others. Actually, until late in the Islamic era, the Hippocratic Oath was used as it is, letter by letter, and then they changed later on. So there are a lot of points in common between the ethical thinkers and regulators in the West and Islamic theology. The only problem is morality. This is the problem of the ethical model of the Western model of ethics. Otherwise, there are many, many similarities in the practical ways, including beneficence, justice, the same thing. It's just the morality background is lacking. Jazakallah khair.
Now, Prof. Stephen.
Well, I have a very simple question, and I hope I remember correctly. Professor Shabana translated into English the 5th principle, fundamental principles of Islamic bioethics as respect for property. Professor Kazule translated it into respect for wealth and resources, and Professor Michal as respect for wealth. Things are very different if you consider the first, the second, or the third translation. And it is something I'm very interested in also for our work on sharing of benefit. So please, what is the most correct translation of this 5th principle? Thank you.
Now, the ball is on your quarters.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very pertinent question. The concept of mal, originally it meant property, But when you look at it from a wider perspective, it means resources. Then, is it material resources? Yes, but also it could cover human resources. So, I teach my students that medicine contributes to this principle. How? By treating the citizens so that they are healthy and can work to develop the economy. So I think the wider meaning is resources in the widest sense. Yeah.
Shabana, Bismillah.
Thank you for this very interesting question. I think this clarifies the dilemma of translation, that when you translate from one language to another, you cannot really capture, as translators always emphasize, capture all the meanings, the dimensions and aspects of loaded terms like this. So this actually also brings to mind the importance of contextualizing these terms and the distinction between a term and a concept. And when we talk about an extended and enriched tradition like the Islamic ethical tradition, I think each generation will have the responsibility to make sure that this tradition speaks to the time. So I agree with Professor Kasula that perhaps the word resources given the discussions about environmental ethics and responsibility towards resources, that makes, of course, sense from the Islamic point of view.
Prof, any questions from this side? Naam, Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You know, Islam is not allowed to donate by sperm or ova. But what about the gene therapy that is especially using for treatment of infertility in the gram cell?
Again, your question. I think, could you be clear? And if I'm not mistaken, that question fits in with Prof. Muhammad Adar and Trevor's session on third day. Could you repeat again? I may not have understood you correctly.
Because Dr. Omar has mentioned about the donation of ova and sperm.
Ova and?
Sperm.
Okay. Oh, IVF.
Okay. So I asked him, what about the gene therapy that is using especially for treating the patient with infertility in the gram cell?
I think...
Jazakallah kulla khair. I think we need to deal with this in a special session because there are more details to follow. But the general principle is, in Islamic law, a child born must have one father and one mother, and it must be very clear. There should be no confusion. So this is hifdh al-nasl. But the details, I think we can discuss in the pertinent session.
I think we have this session on the third day, second session where after the keynote speech of Dr. Muhammad Al-Bar, followed by Trevor on mitochondrial, and then this is where your question fits in rightly with these scholars. Any question? Last question? Naam. Dr. Naila from UK, Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for very enlightening speeches that we've had so far. I would just like to draw another challenging situation in the discussion that we've just had about the interpretation and the very diversity or the differences of interpretation. There is also a great diversity of aqidah, if I'm expressing it rightly, because my experience of interpreting the Islamic codes used in the West has been that often colleagues or patients would turn around and say, oh, this is not according to my aqidah. So if we are going to be putting together a kind of a resource which is going to be representative of an Islamic codes and how the various different guidance is, this will be another challenging aspect which needs to be addressed so that it is a cohesive version which includes all aqidah, and we do not end up with madhabs, yeah. We don't end up with various different, resources which are saying the same thing, but can confuse people in the West.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think this is your field, Professor Gasule.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Actually, in terms of aqidah and general concepts, all Muslims subscribe to the same ones. We have got differences, but this is part of the democracy of Islam, because we have no priests. So any Muslim is free to express his opinion. That is why you hear many different views. In a way, this is positive, because there is no way you can corrupt this religion. There is no one man who has religious authority. But when we develop a code of ethics, we make sure that we write there only what is ijma'. There is unanimous agreement by everybody on it. Things that as areas of differences, we don't have to put it in this. And I think most things are going to end up being of unanimous agreement by everybody. Unanimous, not anonymous, unanimous. Yeah.
One short question, and then we break for the second. Dr. Khalfan Siabi from Oman National Bioethics Committee. Fadal.
Thank you for the lectures. I just have one point or comments. So translation of the mal in the
translation of
mal.
mal.
حفظ المال.
mal. نعم. حفظ المال.
It can be properties, can be resources, can be worth. I think so.
Yes.
If there is a word in English can contain all this meaning, it will be the mal.
We are talking with a lawyer who is
Actually,
very specific.
A comment about this. Our problem is that there is no word in English that can translate mal. Because, languages reflect the world view, a royal kawniyya of the societies that developed them. So in the English language, also the Latin languages, the European tradition, this concept does not exist. Because also your son can be part of your mal. So we are dealing with differences in translation, not of a word, but also of the world view that is behind the word. Yeah. Yes.
Jazakallah khair, ya habib al-qulub. Now we are ending up our first session. Now we call upon the second session, which is immediately followed by the moderator of Dr. Abdullah Al-Judi, whereby we have got Ali Rida Bagheri from Iran, Muhammad Ghali from Qatar Foundation from Holland, Nasir Hamad Al-Azri, and then Abus Shakur from Bangladesh. Abdullah, جزاك الله خير. شكرا. حفظ الوقت بس انا موجود.
وين السي فيز حقتهم؟
في سي في هذا تصق كل ساعه خلاص. اقول لك
عليكم السلام ورحمه الله.
ماشي من هذا رضا.
شوف
with you.
عليكم السلام ورحمه الله وبركاته. تفضل دكتور الله يحييك. Can you just تفسحوا في المجال؟ عليكم السلام. اجي سحبت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor indeed to be part of this conference, and it is an utter honor to chair this important session. Without any further ado, I would like to ask the first presenter, Dr. Ali Rida Bagheri, from a professor from Tehran University of Medical Science in Iran and the vice chairman of the UNESCO International Bioethics, to present his talk on bioethical challenges in Islamic countries and international survey. Dr. Ali, you have 15 minutes to present your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's a great pleasure for me to talk in this very interesting conference, which I would like to thank Dr. Al-Bamani, the head of the Omani National Bioethics Committee, and my colleague Dr. Ahmad and his team. My talk is about bioethics challenges in Islamic countries. Actually, a few years ago, dealing with different topics in bioethics at the Ministry of Health of Iran, I was confronted with several medical doctors coming to us that this is our topic, this is our problem, this is our ethical dilemma in medicine, and the ethics center should work on this topic and that topic. And we realized it's hard to see what is the priority, because working in a single bioethics center, you have to prioritize the topics, otherwise you can't use the resources wisely. And we conducted a survey in Iran to see what is the bioethical challenges in my country. And a few months later, I realized that the same question would be raised among Islamic bioethicists. What I mean by Islamic bioethicists is the scholars who have written papers and books on different topics in Islamic bioethics. And we realized that this also can help us to see what is the priorities among Islamic scholars and bioethicists in terms of bioethical topics. That's why I have conducted a questionnaire survey, and the aim was to see what is the priorities in Islamic bioethics. As you know, Islamic countries are geographically diverse. As it has been discussed a few minutes ago, there are different opinions, diverse perspectives in different topics. But however, all Islamic countries, they share the same background. And each Islamic countries may have different priorities and challenges in bioethical issues. That's why, to identify bioethics priorities and challenges in Islamic societies, an international questionnaire survey was conducted in 2011 to document the opinions of Muslim bioethicists. And based on this study, we prepared a list of topics based on an extensive review literature, and these topics were sent to 5 Islamic bioethicists to see how they think, how they prioritize, or how they think that this topic is related to Islamic bioethics or not. And finally, we concluded the list with 20 topics. And the questionnaire was sent to 65 Islamic bioethicists, which I mentioned how they have been identified. It was based on their writings, articles, and books on different topics in Islamic bioethics. And we got the response rate of 83% of those 65 questionnaires. There were almost 70% male scholars, 30% female scholars. In terms of their education, 88% were MD or PhD degrees, and 11% had MA or MSc degrees. In terms of bioethics activities, they could choose 1 or 2 activities based on their background, which almost 70% were involved in bioethics teaching, 11% at the policy making level, and 62% were involved in research in different topics in bioethics. 22% were ethics consultants. And from now on, I will present what are the priorities in Islamic bioethics based on the participants' opinion. Priority number 1 is the relation between law, ethics, and fatwa. In Islamic bioethics, the priority of religious positions is evident. Scientists and physicians are very keen to explore what would be the opinions of Islamic scholars. if you look at what the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences have done through almost 3 decades, we will see in each session, each conferences, they invited Islamic scholars to see what is their opinion regarding the ethical dilemma in medicine, which has been raised during which was the theme of the conference. For example, for brain death, for abortion, or other topics. They were very keen to see what is the Islamic scholars' opinion, or in terms of, in practice, we can say what is the fatwas on that particular topics. And it seems, based on the survey which I have done, it is really important to see what is the relationship between law, ethics, and fatwa. In other countries, we will see that the relation between ethics and law is a really important issue. But when it comes to Islamic societies, we will see 3 elements. It's a law, it's ethics, and also it's fatwa. And how they work together. For example, in my own country, there are several bioethics issues which we have a fatwa on, but we don't have, we have no discussion on ethical or legal issues. And that's why it seems the relationship between these 3 elements is really important, and it was placed on a priority number 1. Priority number 2 is justice and health resource allocation. Based on the Islamic teachings, the principle of justice represents a common concern in Islamic societies. It's not just medical sciences or bioethics. In any social aspects, we will see how important is the principle of justice. As you know, many Islamic countries, they deal with the scarcity of health resources, and it's very crucial to develop a conceptual framework for just distribution of health resources based on Islamic concept of justice. And it seems this is the reason that the participants have chosen priority number 2 for justice. The priority number 3 is human rights. As you know, the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed by many Islamic countries, but not all Islamic countries at that time. And the concern was that the Universal Declaration is not being sensitive to cultural context, and it's not consistent with the Islamic Sharia. And maybe that's why this was the reason why the Organization for Islamic Cooperation in 1990 decided to take the initiative for another declaration, which is called the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam. However, although the Article 24 states all the rights and freedoms stipulated in the declaration are subject to the Islamic Sharia, and in the Article 25, it refers every decision-making to Islamic Sharia. But this declaration also has been criticized by saying that everything is referenced to Islamic Sharia, but as a matter of fact, Islamic Sharia is not something exactly the same in different Islamic countries. There are different interpretations of Islamic Sharia, and that's why we see different practice in terms of human rights in Islamic societies. Priority number 4 is bioethics capacity building. In many Islamic countries now, based on their interest, bioethics capacity building, it's an agenda. Now we are in Oman, and I'm very happy to see that bioethics is on the agenda for the ministries here, and the job of bioethics, National Bioethics Committee is great here, and I'm very happy to get more familiar with the situation in Oman. In other Islamic countries, the same. We have different initiatives for capacity building in bioethics in Islamic countries. Priority number 5 is patients' rights. There has been a growing attention to the concept of patients' rights in Islamic societies, but however, there is a different perspective in terms of patient-centered care, which we see in the West, and the traditional paternalism, especially in healthcare system in many Islamic countries. And it seems that it is a challenge how to transit from paternalism to patient-centered care. And maybe that's why the participants have chosen patients' rights as priority number 5. Number 6 is brain death and organ transplantation. As you all know, that these 2 topics it leads to a long-lasting debate among physicians and Islamic scholars whether brain death is equal to human death or not, whether we can remove an organ from a human being for transplantation, whether we can remove an organ from a dead body for organ transplantation.
5 minutes, Doctor.
Pardon?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Priority number 7 is individual autonomy and informed consent. Again, the notion of individual autonomy which exists in the West is not recognized in Islamic societies. The principle of public good and principle of no harm and no harassment is the basis of decision making, especially in healthcare and public policy. And the question is the proportionality between individual and community interest, how we can balance these two interests. Priority number 8 is Islamic principle of bioethics. In the previous session, we witnessed the discussion what would be the principle of Islamic bioethics, but if we look at the literature, we can find these principles: public good or maslaha, do no harm, la dharara wa la dirar, justice, necessity, darura, and protection against distress and constriction, all al-usri wal-haraj. But still, to me, this is under development, and Islamic bioethics scholars have to work on this to elaborate what would be the principle of Islamic bioethics. Priority number 9 is abortion. All religions, they have different perspectives. Even within the religion, you will see different perspectives on abortion, different rulings. In practice, most schools in Islam turn to the onset of installment for ruling on abortion, but however, the notion of installment and the time which it takes place is controversial, and that's why we have different fatwas on abortion. Priority number 10 is bioethics committees. It seems that in Islamic countries, like many other countries, based on demand of international organizations such as WHO and UNESCO, national ethics committees have been established in many of these countries. However, hospital ethics committees remain underdeveloped in Islamic societies. And this is the list of the priorities. As I have mentioned, there were 20 topics which the participants could choose. These are the 10 topics, as the top 10 topics have been chosen by the participants. But the 10 topics which was not included in the top 10 topics are public health ethics, ethics in research, surrogacy, and embryo donation. I think, for example, there are particular reasons for each of these topics which didn't get to the top 10 listings. For example, surrogacy and embryo donation is not allowed in many Islamic countries except my own country, Iran, and maybe that's why when you have an international survey, that's the reason why it didn't get to the top 10 priorities. Cloning, stem cell research, women's health ethics, end-of-life ethics, environmental ethics, beginning of life ethics, genomics ethics, and nanotechnology, nanoethics. For example, in terms of nanoethics, as you know, it needs a very sophisticated technologies to get involved in nanotechnology, and it's very expensive. Maybe that's why it didn't get to the top 10 priorities. Ranking the top bioethical challenges is an effective and valuable way to prioritize those issues because resources are limited. If an ethics committee or a research center wants to work on different topics, they have to prioritize because the resources are limited. Bringing these priorities to the attention of researchers and policymakers is very important, and it's instrumental in the efforts to determine the concept of Islamic bioethics. My study has its own limitation. It was based on an international questionnaire survey. Although I could reach larger participation, but it lacks in-depth discussions, and that's why if there would be a combination of quantitative and qualitative research, that would give us an accurate result on the priorities. This work was published recently by the Asian Bioethics Review and also is cited in the Center for Legislation and Ethics, Islamic Legislation and Ethics in Qatar. Also, I'm very glad just to let you know that this book, Islamic Bioethics, Contemporary Issues and Challenges, which is edited by myself and Dr. Khaled Al-Ali in Qatar University, will be published by the Imperial College Press before the end of this year, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. The next speaker is Professor Muhammad Ghali, the Professor of Islam and Bioethical Ethics, Biomedical Ethics at Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He will talk about who speaks for Islamic bioethics, the role of biomedical scientists in focus. Dr. Muhammad, you have 15 minutes to present your presentation. The floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for having me here today. I'm really honored to be part of this event, and special thanks to all organizers and to my dear colleague, Dr. Khitami. Today I want to speak about a specific issue, a methodological issue in the contemporary field of Islamic bioethics, who speaks for. And my focus will be on the biomedical scientists. And as a disclaimer, I want to say I'm not a biomedical scientist. I didn't study medicine. I'm coming from the Islamic studies part. To put our discussion into context, generally speaking, in Islamic law, when we have a novel issue or a difficult issue or unprecedented issue, usually before coming to the answer or the fatwa or the conclusion, there are two main components that the jurist or the religious scholar work with. There is what I call the informative component. There are too many usuli terms for this. I just want to make it easy. The informative component, which includes the information about the reality, the issue in question, in order to create the right perception, al-tasawwur al-sahih, as we say. And then we have the normative component, the jurist in question who will look into the Quran, the Sunnah, the different evidences in Islamic Sharia. And then we have the dialogical or reciprocal process by going forth and back between the informative and the normative, and then he comes to the conclusion. This is generally read upon in Islamic legal manuals, especially in legal theory or usul al-fiqh. When it comes to contemporary issues of Islamic bioethics, it became clear that the usual case that one person will be able to do both, number one, and number two, the informative and the normative component, will not be easy anymore. And of course, sometimes the nazila or the predicament comes not necessarily because the whole issue is new, but sometimes because the information, we got new information. It is the same issue, the same case, but we got added new information which will change the whole normative component. Like, for instance, cutting parts from the body of a human being, this is mutilation, the normative component. But if we will take these parts of the body in order to save the life of another human being, then the information is new. Then we need to recapitulate the whole issue. Is it mutilation? Is it medical treatment, etc.? The need for someone else to help the religious scholar to answer these difficult questions when we have new information started very early. One of the earliest fatwas I have seen that reflected this need to have people who will support and assist the religious scholars in understanding new issues in the field of medical ethics or bioethics was published by Rashid Rida in his well-known journal Al-Manar in 1910. In 1910, he received a question from Tunisia about the duration of pregnancy. And the title of the fatwa was مُدَّةُ حَمْلِ النِّسَاءِ شَرْعًا وَطِبًّا. Usually, you would have only the duration of pregnancy. You will not have the subtitle from religious and medical perspectives. But now we see that in the title itself, we see both the informative and the normative component, شرعاً وطباً. Why was this the case? Because the questioner from Tunisia, he said that it is generally accepted in the Islamic tradition that pregnancy can continue for years, the extended pregnancy. And he said now in Tunisia, we have French physicians who tell us this is unacceptable and cannot be accommodated within modern sciences of medicine. So it is just unacceptable and impossible from a medical point of view. The questioner said that now we have medical knowledge challenging long-established perceptions. So the discrepancy between the informative and the normative started to be clear, at least in this case. Interestingly enough, the questioner said that the question is directed not to you, to Rashid Rida only, but also to your good friend, physician Tawfiq Sidqi. So here the question is directed to both persons, to the religious scholar Rashid Rida and also to the physician Tawfiq Sidqi, because it's clear there is overlap between the two, and Rashid Rida is not in a position to judge the medical views in this regard. Rida was very positive, and he said that if modern knowledge, he means by this, medicine is rejected, there is a danger that educated Muslims, especially those who study medicine, will cease to respect the religion as divine. So incorporating medical views in the informative component to understand the question was more or less accepted without rejection from the beginning. But how far should physicians go? Should they only mention the medical views and stop here, or can they go a bit further to touch upon the normative component? We have a case published in Majallat al-Wa'i al-Islami, I think a Kuwaiti journal, in 1967, and speaks about an article, or what he calls medical fatwa, fatwa tibbiyya, published in a medical journal, Majallat al-Tabibak, in Syria. And the reader of this majalla, of this journal, he directed a question to a physician. And it was about artificial insemination, and the physician gave an answer, which actually he shouldn't have given, at least according to the Mufti here in Majallat al-Wa'i al-Islami. And he completely disagreed with the conclusion of the physician, and he said, فَسِيَادَتُهُ قَدْ أَفْتَى فَتْوَى فِرَنْسِيَّة لَا فَتْوَى إِسْلَامِيَّة. He gave a French fatwa, but not an Islamic one. And he should have restricted himself to giving medical fatwas and not to insert his nose in our specialization. What would be his case? The Mufti wonders, if I gave, the religious scholar, if I gave medical fatwa to the patients, what would he think of me? So please respect, we should respect our own specializations. With the many questions raised in the field of bioethical issues, it became clear that we need, the informative component became very problematic. And it cannot be easily solved by, especially by the religious scholars who have no access to first-hand information about bioethical issues. And it became clear also that the first component clearly influenced the second one. So the information given most of the time will affect the normative component. So we added biomedical scientists beside the jurists, but the idea was always that biomedical scientists will only give the information, and we will not have this process going forth and back. Then we have the Ijtihad al-Jama'i, the International Fiqh Academy, Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, etc.